This is San Francisco.
Welcome to San Francisco, where Garry Tan has appointed himself the voice of Asian America and tech, and now at 42 is a tech bro past his prime, whose goal is to take the money he made at Palantir and promoting crypto and NFT scams and use it to make everyone else as miserable as him. Garry was born in Winnipeg in Canada and had an engineer dad. Garry wanted to be like dad and headed to Stanford for college, although he likes to promote himself as someone who came from much humbler beginnings and rose to the top against the odds. Garry invited Peter Thiel to his computer club at Stanford and went on to work for Thiel's Palantir, which provides technology for immigration prisons on the Mexican border. Garry wants to spread his version of tech libertarianism, that is socialism, but for corporations instead of people. And he's starting with San Francisco. He's pushing this techie cult he likes to call effective accelerationism, which, like effective altruism before it, is a public relations campaign preying on the next generation of lonely sociopaths in STEM from Stanford to try to salvage the tech industry's reputation. Garry started funding the public school board recall in San Francisco and the campaign of Supervisor Joel Engardio, who's this archetype of a gay guy who goes to IKEA on opening day to call 911 on shoplifters. On a recent afternoon, Garry was hanging out barefoot with Martin Shkreli at the tech hype house and AI incubator hackerspace called the AGI House. Shkreli is the biotech investor, of course, who bought a patent to an anti-AIDS, anti-parasite drug called Daraprim so he could jack up the price of that drug 5,400%. Preaching about effective accelerationism, Garry told a house full of young Y Combinator mentees about his desire to subdue and tame the Bay Area and the world.
It's so important for us to build here, because if we can build here, we're going to take over the whole country. We're going to take over every nation in the world. That's what is starting tonight, here, among all of you.
Every chance they can get, the media is handing a microphone to Garry, this guy who is obsessed with building an echo chamber for the tech industry and one by one blocks everyone on Twitter who he disagrees with, including myself and probably you, and for sure, Emily Mills, who is here to talk about Garry's attempt to feed the rest of us his brand of Bay Area libertarianism. We should all thank Emily Mills for doing God's work, keeping track of some of the richest people in politics in the Bay and who they're spending their money on in terms of campaigns and candidates. Garry Tan is a prime example of this common archetype in tech, basically a libertarian CEO who wants socialism, but only for corporations. I personally first laid eyes on Garry Tan, as a lot of the world did, when he showed up on cable news to beg DC to bail out Silicon Valley Bank back in March. He was trying to make a case for the wealthy people who put their money into the bank, mostly in tech. It actually claimed to be the bank for 65% of all US startups at one point, but also other businesses serving them like wineries and party planners. And in the end, Garry Tan did get his wish, and there was no accountability for people like Garry and his friends in Silicon Valley who had dumped large amounts of money into this bank that was loaning out a lot more funds than it had. And then lately, Elon Musk and Garry Tan have been targeting Dean Preston, who's the most progressive politician on the Board of Supervisors for SF. But Emily, how did you become aware of Garry Tan?
So I first became aware of Garry Tan during the school board recall. I started noticing the school board recall just because I'd been happy that our kids were home safe during COVID because no vaccines were available, and everywhere else they were talking about putting kids back in school, and it just really wasn't that safe to me. And to put it in time, it's like February 2021, right? The people who are promoting the school board recall tend to be anti-vaxxers, anti-maskers. And it really wasn't that obvious at the time. It's more obvious now. And their school board recalls weren't that popular at the time, but clearly they're a manufactured thing now.
Right.
So Michelle Tandler is the one who announced the whole thing going live. And Michelle Tandler is basically, her whole shtick is I'm a native San Franciscan, and here's the most outrageous thing you've ever heard that probably isn't true. That's basically her shtick. She drives up engagement by trashing San Francisco, making outrageous claims that aren't backed by science, and then markets that to newspapers, and people eat it up.
Doing this from New York City.
From New York
for the
City.
most part. Yeah.
Yeah. The recall gets announced, right? And it's Autumn and Siva are this couple who just moved to San Francisco 2 months ago, right? Out of nowhere, after they had met online and they had joined Y Combinator. They meet, they go to Y Combinator, and they're going to make this app. And then they decide to move to San Francisco in the middle of the pandemic in December during winter break. And then when they get back from winter break, apparently they decide that they're going to recall the school board. You know, I came to San Francisco when I moved here. My child was still going to school out of town. We were on an interdistrict transfer. And because I didn't have, proof that I lived here, because I hadn't been here that long, it was very hard to go back and forth because my job was in a different town. And to prove that I lived here, it was ridiculous. So the fact that these people could just pop in the school district out of nowhere is just, it's kind of a little weird.
And this is a case for a lot of municipalities where people will come in, and because they have some kind of political agenda that they want to push, people do use the board as sort of a stepping stone onto other political office. In so many cases, you do have these people who you would think would have very little skin in the game.
Yeah. But as we found out, one candidate that they were promoting the whole time was building a private school on the side. Insoo was appointed by London Breed, and then she was not elected in the election.
Right.
She's sitting on the public school board, sending off paperwork while she sat on the board. And then as soon as she, was off the board, she announced that she was going to start it.
Okay, so you became aware of Garry Tan around the school board recall. We know now so much of the money that was coming into that recall, as well as the recall of Chesabuddin, the progressive DA. The funds, in large part, were coming from out of the city, from people like the Kochs, the Bose family money that was exposed later on. So Garry Tan was on the side of these people who I think a lot of people living in San Francisco would say, these are not our people.
Yeah.
From what you know, what are some of his connections in the tech world, which is where he made most of his money?
So I believe that most of his connections, have their genesis at Stanford. This is where he met Sachin Agrawal. This is where he invited Peter Thiel to his club. So basically, he's kind of in with the Stanford crew, I guess you'd say. For some reason, he's kind of tight in that group as soon as he graduates, right? So he graduates in 2003, and he goes in to work for Microsoft. And in 2004, Peter Thiel calls him and flies him down from Seattle and says, come work for me, and I'll, you're making $72,000 at Microsoft. And Garry Tan thinks, it's the lowest you can make, but he doesn't take it because he thinks he's going to get a raise the next year. And Peter Thiel wanted him to help form Palantir, but he says no, right? But who else does? Oh, Joe Lonsdale, Alex Karp, they all go in to do that. But next year comes around and goes and he quits and he goes and works for Palantir, right? And so he builds their teams and he designs their logo and all that. But apparently something happened and he said, well, you got tired of working like a dog for Peter Thiel or something like that. He doesn't like to have a boss. And so he's going to go to Y Combinator and he's going to do an app with Sachin from Stanford, his buddy, right? he's always kind of been in this circle, right, of people who were kind of handpicked by Thiel. He goes off to Boston and they start Posterous, and then they sell it to Twitter, right? I mean, this is like the whole group is just freaking insular and it just keeps coming back, right?
Yeah.
Which is why I'm like, it really comes down to a lot to Stanford in the late 90s, a lot of the time, you know? So he sells it to Twitter. And then Brian Armstrong comes along. He's like, I've got this idea about cryptocurrency. You know, I'm going to make this exchange or whatever. And that he wants to build Coinbase. And so Garry Tan's like, right on, here's $300,000. And then Garry Tan now calls it, you know, like the $300,000 that turned into $2 billion. So, you know, he basically had this rise from graduating Stanford, being offered a check from Peter Thiel, and then just, yeah, that just kept happening, basically. I think he has a lot of friends and a lot of influence because he has a lot of money at this point. And he's probably surrounded by yes people.
People with money, that's kind of what follows.
And people think he's smart because, as we've learned over the last 10 years, like people just will think sometimes that rich people are smart. Trump's smart. Otherwise, he wouldn't have made all that money, right? You know, like people will just justify it.
Right. And Y Combinator, for people who don't know, is in Palo Alto, known for spinning off a bunch of startups like Airbnb, and a lot of the big consumer-facing tech companies did have a start in what is essentially like a fellowship program for startup bros. They get mentored by people in the industry, such as Garry Tan.
You had asked, you know, who had helped Garry Tan on his way up, and Garry Tan and Agarwal, when they did go to Y Combinator, Garry Tan's mentor at Y Combinator was Paul Graham. So that's kind of a person who would have kind of been a really helpful hand on the way up.
The meat of this episode is, what does Garry Tan's existence mean to the rest of us? And you explained some of that with his profound interest in San Francisco's school board and the conservative recall campaign that was successful. What are some of the other campaigns and candidates that might give people an idea as to his political leanings?
The other campaigns that he's participated in have been like, the recall of the DA. He put in, I want to say, like 100,000 into. We had clubhouses and all sorts of events. He's a lot of a hype man, as we saw during the bank crashes. So, right. He can get people moving with money, whether or not he moves his own, something else. He was putting money into Grow SF and then joined Grow SF as a part of their team, which is a PAC. They have their whole Dump Dean campaign, but they haven't picked out a candidate to run against him, but they're sure are like raising money or moving money, I should say. Gary's MO seems to be one that combines sort of this prosperity gospel type style with effective accelerationism. And he seems to embrace that proudly at the expense of other people's safety. So how I even became aware, I want to say, of Garry Tan, like through the recall, where I kind of really became aware of him, was I had made a comment about someone who had doxed me. I said, this person had doxed me. He came in and said, this person is Blue Anon, and they're a mob of crazies and harassing my friend. And I thought, I'm just a mom from like the school district being like, hey, this isn't cool. That's about the time I realized that there was like this massive block list that Garry had going on, and everybody else kind of realized too.
I'm on it, as well.
Yeah, all the cool people are.
I'll take it as a badge of honor of some sort, because I had not had any interactions with the guy. But when somebody wants to bring about a world where he can dictate how other people live, then yeah, fair enough. Like, please block me. Yeah.
The flip side of that coin is, he's silencing the opposition and he's drowning out any sort of criticism. So if, say, journalists follow him because, he's a voice on Twitter that, they feel they need to get a quote from, well, they're not going to see any of the dissent. I believe that he's kind of just of the mind that he can, because that's his experience, he can demand change and get it if he throws enough money at the situation, because there are enough people that want to be in his sphere because they think it's beneficial financially or career-wise or politically.
What's his Martin Shkreli connection?
The effective accelerationism. That's the whole bag now, right? So there's this video going around that
we'll link to it.
AGI, the AGI House has posted. And Garry is giving a speech there, and it's all about how they have to build effective accelerationism here, which is kind of a spin-off of the effective altruism movement that, and we have to build it in San Francisco because then we can take over the nation and then we can take over the world, which is pretty troubling statement to make.
Yeah.
When you have a lot of money and you have a lot of people and you're in a position of power and you're making statements about taking over the world after you just usurped an election, with that money, it's problematic in that it's kind of showing that the will of the people can be drowned out with enough money being paid to certain people. And that's the other thing. Garry's kind of throwing in a little money at all these other little GoFundMe's too. You'll see them pop up somewhere, like these people who are trashing the town. Like, and then here comes Garry with $1,000. I don't know why it's always $1,000, but it's like, it doesn't seem like he's doing his due diligence either. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's just pocket change to him.
Yeah.
And
he spent probably more on apes than he did recalling our political, fairly elected people. On cartoons that don't even exist.
Right. His NFTs, as far as the value that he's added.
It seems like he might actually be doing harm to the tourism industry in San Francisco. I think that's an argument to be made. There's an argument to be made that some of these people who spread a lot of the doom narrative about San Francisco and that aren't necessarily based in fact are hindering businesses from coming back and, even their own sector.
Right. If people want to follow some of your work online, is there a place we can send them?
Oh, sure. So my Twitter handle is SF_Mills, MILLS. I tweet a lot.
Please never stop until Twitter goes down, X goes down.
If anybody ever has any questions too, I'm always happy to answer anything about any research I do. So there's that too.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Emily.
Thank you.
Sad Francisco is a podcast produced by Caitlin Wood and Toshio Moronic. If you like the show, please go to patreon.com/Sad Francisco. See you next time in Sad Francisco.